Okay, I'm here with Phil again, talking about authenticity in leadership, not through the usual method of the Harvard Business School, but through the method of the top restaurant owners and chefs in the world. You know something about cooking to order, don't you, Phil, about how you can bring authenticity to cooking. Let's explore that first.
From an authenticity point of view, most of the people I've interviewed in restaurants gave this thing that makes you feel that feelings are involved as well. Great quote from someone who said, "Food that is fought over never tastes good." So it can still have all the right ingredients, but the food sort of gets infected with the bad feeling. That happens so easily and so often in business too. People have a bad feeling about each other, therefore they start this internal navel gazing. They're looking at their internally rather than looking at outside, and they get beaten up by others.
So is your second part of that, it sounds like food which is thought over isn't often as good as food which is fought over.
Food that is thought over rather than fought over. We don't want too much fighting, but you've got to get it past that ability to make sure that we're all in it together. So there might need to be a bit of argument to start with, but you've got to all love what you're doing to make the thing that comes out at the end tasty.
So it sounds like both there. You've got conflict you've mentioned is important, but also a desire to get to the end. If you only have conflict, you have the situation that prevails in many organisations where people fight over something because they have no interest in the end point.
It's that Tuckman model that everyone talks about.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, the forming, norming, storming, and then performing. A lot of people get stuck in the very first bit, which is the storming bit. The only thing, if you have a look at that model, the axis along the bottom, is that X or Y?
I think we are looking at that model as I speak,
Yeah,
because we
gosh,
have
that
it
was
printed
lucky.
on a loaf of bread.
So what you can see is the bit along the bottom is time, and that's the only thing that we can never sort out. But what leaders do is what we never know how long it's going to take. What leaders do and the best teams do is foreshorten that as much as possible, so we can get to the performing mode as quickly as possible. I must admit, the first time I ever saw this model was back in the 80s when I first became a manager, and I thought it was like true MBA management speak, and I thought, this is not real. Every team I've ever worked with goes through the phases. The only time that you don't notice it as much is when you get the first 3 phases through as quickly as possible.
And teams that don't succeed and perform get stuck often at the storming, or not even, they don't even get that far. They're just all being nice to one another. So being nice to one another is no good for management. It's no good for a short order chef to just all be nice. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and it gets back to food that's fought over. If you're trying to make mayonnaise and you do it slightly wrong, it splits. So it never ever mixes up. So you never get the team working well together. So sauces that split are a very good metaphor for things that have gone wrong. And often you don't quite know what you've done wrong when that happens as a chef. It's really difficult to put your finger on it. That happens in business too.
So it sounds to me as though good management, good cooking requires people to tolerate conflict at work. But if you only have that, you just have lots of waste and costs, loss and what have you. But if that conflict is fighting over something which really matters to people, like the production of a great piece of food or the launch of a project, then the conflict produces good energy that actually ends up in the product and what have you.
Can I link you back to the conflict bit? Conflict can be passion, because people are passionately involved in wanting to make something be as good as it possibly can be. So the authentically working teams who respect each other are quite happy with the conflict because they know they can sort it, because they've got an underlying respect for each other. Teams that carry on in conflict, the respect never gets sorted out.
That, for me, relates to sort of very creative organisations that actually really encourage diversity, not because it's just politically correct, but because it's essential to get innovation in their products and services. I mean, the BBC is one of those organisations that is currently concerned to use every ounce of its diversity in its widest sense of people who think differently, and it's concluded it needs to actually have more happy conflicts, ones that actually lead to a resolution rather than just another meeting.
So it's the conflict resolution that's more important in that case. Got a great joke from the BBC when we worked with them. Do you remember that, when someone said, we asked them, because I had no idea, how many people work here at the BBC? And the chap thought very sagely, stroked his beard and said, about half of us.
So if you could sum up about what we can learn from the short order chef, what are the two or three lessons that are transferable to most businesses?
The most important thing is that you need to get the right ingredients, not fighting with each other. So that's stirring things the right way. The short order chef needs to know where they are in the whole scheme of things, because they're only getting a little part of the whole thing to do. Isn't that important in business? From a jigsaw, you've got to know where you link with everyone else, and know that with as much detail and as much crispness as possible.
How does that happen in a kitchen? Do they rotate or something? How do they learn the whole?
The most difficult thing is learning the whole, because from a short order point of view, you have to look after your part, your piece of the whole, and be led well. It does come down to having the right head chef who will do all the right things, rather than not being able to manage people, or only being able to cook, or not understanding business. They've got to do all three.
Okay. And conflict?
Conflict is usually sorted out in the best restaurants, often at the end of service. What did we learn from service? The organisations I've talked to that seem to do this well would never let bad feeling go to bed.
Okay.
So it's a bit like relationships in the real world as well.
So we're finished. We're back to sex in the bedroom once again, Phil.
We're never going to get away from sex in the bedroom, or in the kitchen sometimes.
No.